In the world of business finance, understanding the difference between fixed costs and variable costs is essential for managers, entrepreneurs, and investors. These two categories of costs directly influence profitability, pricing strategies, and financial forecasting. While both types of costs are part of a company's overall expenditures, they behave differently and require distinct approaches for budgeting, managing, and optimizing. Fixed costs, as the name suggests, remain constant regardless of the business's output, whereas variable costs fluctuate in direct proportion to production or sales. In this video, we will explore the top 10 major differences between fixed costs and variable costs in business, highlighting their impact on financial planning, decision-making, and long-term strategy. 1. Definition: fixed costs versus variable costs. Fixed costs are expenses that do not change in response to the level of production or sales within a given period. These costs remain constant regardless of how much a company produces. Examples of fixed costs include rent, salaries, insurance, and loan payments. On the other hand, variable costs are expenses that vary directly with the level of production or sales. As production increases, variable costs increase, and as production decreases, variable costs decrease. Common examples of variable costs include raw materials, direct labor, shipping costs, and commissions. Understanding the basic definitions of these two types of costs is the first step toward distinguishing them in business operations. 2. Behavior relative to production levels. Fixed costs remain unchanged regardless of how much a company produces. Whether a company produces 10 units or 10,000 units, the fixed costs remain constant. This characteristic makes fixed costs predictable and easier to budget for in the short term. In contrast, variable costs fluctuate with production levels. As output increases, the cost of materials, labor, and other production-related expenses rises. Conversely, when production slows down, variable costs decrease proportionally. This direct relationship with production levels makes variable costs harder to predict, requiring more careful monitoring. 3. Predictability and planning. One of the main advantages of fixed costs is their predictability. Since they do not change with production, companies can forecast these expenses with relative ease and include them in their budget without concern for fluctuations. For example, rent payments, insurance premiums, and equipment depreciation are fixed and will not change from month to month. In contrast, variable costs are harder to predict because they depend on external factors like demand and production schedules. This uncertainty means that businesses need more flexible financial plans to accommodate fluctuations in costs related to raw materials, labor, and shipping. 4. Impact on break-even analysis. Fixed costs play a critical role in determining a company's break-even point, the level of sales needed to cover both fixed and variable costs. Since fixed costs remain constant, they contribute significantly to the fixed portion of this calculation. The higher the fixed costs, the more units a business must sell to break even. Variable costs, however, impact the break-even point in a different way. They are considered in the calculation of the contribution margin, which is the sales revenue remaining after covering variable costs. The lower the variable costs, the fewer units a company needs to sell to break even. The interaction between fixed and variable costs is key to understanding the dynamics of profitability. 5. Flexibility in business operations. Fixed costs are generally not flexible in the short term. For example, if a company's sales drop, it cannot immediately reduce its fixed costs like rent or salaries. This can be a challenge during times of low revenue, as businesses must find ways to cover these expenses regardless of output. In contrast, variable costs are much more flexible. A company can reduce variable costs quickly by lowering production levels, cutting labor hours, or negotiating better prices for raw materials. This flexibility allows businesses to adjust to fluctuating demand without incurring the same level of financial strain that fixed costs can create. 6. Contribution to profit margins. Fixed costs impact profit margins because they must be covered regardless of production or sales volume. High fixed costs can result in lower profit margins, especially if a business struggles to generate enough sales to cover them. However, once fixed costs are covered, any additional sales contribute directly to profit. Variable costs, on the other hand, decrease the contribution margin since they are incurred with each unit produced. A business with high variable costs will have a smaller margin per sale compared to one with lower variable costs. Therefore, controlling variable costs is crucial for improving profitability, as these costs fluctuate with production and sales levels. 7. Long-term versus short-term nature. Fixed costs are typically long-term in nature and are incurred regardless of business performance over a period. For instance, contracts for leasing equipment, property, or machinery often have terms of several years, making them long-term commitments. Variable costs, however, are short-term in nature and tied directly to day-to-day operations. These costs adjust more quickly to market conditions, production schedules, and consumer demand. Variable costs give businesses the ability to respond to market changes by scaling operations up or down. 8. Impact on cost structure and pricing decisions. A company's cost structure, how fixed and variable costs are distributed, can influence pricing decisions. A business with a high proportion of fixed costs may need to set higher prices to cover those costs, ensuring profitability even if production levels fluctuate. This is because the fixed costs remain the same regardless of how many units are sold. On the other hand, a company with a higher percentage of variable costs may have more flexibility in pricing, as costs only increase when production does. Variable cost-heavy businesses can often offer lower prices when demand is low but still make a profit, as their costs decrease with reduced output. 9. Effects on scalability. Scalability refers to the ability of a business to grow without being hindered by its structure or available resources. A business with high fixed costs may face challenges when scaling, as increasing production requires meeting the fixed expenses without an immediate increase in income. For example, expanding a factory requires additional space, equipment, and personnel, leading to a significant increase in fixed costs. However, once these fixed costs are covered, additional units of production contribute more to profit. In contrast, a business with high variable costs may find it easier to scale since additional production leads directly to higher costs but also to more revenue. Businesses with more variable costs can more easily adapt to changing demand. 10. Examples of fixed costs versus variable costs. Fixed costs include rent, insurance, property taxes, salaries of permanent staff, and long-term loan payments. These are expenses that do not fluctuate regardless of the level of business activity. Variable costs, on the other hand, include raw materials, commissions, packaging, and shipping costs. These costs rise and fall depending on the amount of product produced or services delivered. Businesses often need to carefully manage both types of costs to maintain profitability, ensuring that fixed costs are covered while controlling variable costs as production and sales fluctuate. Understanding the differences between fixed and variable costs is crucial for any business owner, manager, or investor. While fixed costs are predictable, long-term, and offer limited flexibility, variable costs fluctuate with production levels, providing more adaptability but requiring careful management to avoid excessive spending. Both types of costs impact pricing, profitability, scalability, and financial strategy. By understanding how these costs interact with each other, businesses can better plan for growth, make informed pricing decisions, and develop strategies for controlling expenses. Whether operating a small startup or a large corporation, knowing the distinction between fixed and variable costs allows businesses to optimize their operations, maximize profits, and adapt to changing market conditions.